you can also, join tables with other people. You're all spread out. We may have some people coming in halfway through because we noticed that there's the time of the session is incorrect in the app. So we may get some people at 11:30, but we do have lots of space. So I think we'll be safe. But well, few but mighty. This is going to be a really good session. We have Ginny Bromberg and Jessica Jakub from Bromberg and Associates to lead us in the session. And very lucky. These two ladies are very passionate about their work. In fact, Jessica is actually, this is the subject of her master's thesis, and she's actually getting her master's next week, graduating, I think. So this is a great lead up to that. And then for the multilingual part of it, I mean, if you really wanted to, Jenny could even do this in Georgian.
Well, not the whole thing, no.
No.
By Georgian, the conversational level at best.
But my point is that these two ladies are really passionate about this subject, so I think you'll have lots to learn. So I'm just going to leave the floor to you. Oh, and I'm Alessandra, just here to present the presenters. But if you have any question or if anything happens, you can ask me.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for attending today. We're really excited to talk about our topic. And we will try to have this, and especially considering that we might not have a lot of people, we will try to have it as interactive as possible. We're planning some polls and, of course, Q&A at the end. So we'll get started with the first poll right now. Okay, so this is just a Slido. Hopefully the internet will help us. So we have 3 questions for you to get started. If you haven't used Slido before, you can just scan that QR code or go to slido.com and enter that room number, and then just answer the questions we have. And I'm gonna keep it up for about a minute so we can stay on track with our presentation, even though we started a little later than planned. And our first poll is to just gauge your, we have 3 questions in the first poll. We just want to gauge your experience with e-learning. So we'll give it a few more minutes, a few more seconds. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next question just because we have to stay on track with time. That was the first question too. All right, and then one more question for this poll. All right, great. So I will stop this now. Thank you, and then we'll get back to our presentation. I will turn it over to Ginny. She's gonna get us started. All right, can you all hear me? Great. I think since it's a small room and we are a small crowd, I will remain seated for now, just, you know. So thank you for sharing your experience with e-learning, and I'd
I'd like to start by sharing mine. My very first e-learning experience dates back to 1999, and it was a class in my master's program. I was a working adult. I had a toddler on my hands and practically no free time. However, my classes were all in person, and I had to drive about 40 minutes one way, um, 3 times a week to attend my classes. That was my challenge and my obstacle to keeping my grades as high as possible because I honestly had to skip a lot of classes, and attendance was also scored in the total grade. So when I saw a class being offered online, and it was with a professor that I actually had in my prior semester, I jumped at a chance and registered for that class. Though I've never had anything remote, never had any e-learning experience prior to, but I thought, well, why not? Let's explore it. And honestly, it was my favorite class at that point. And not because it was a great class, because it wasn't. The video was really subpar, the audio was so-so, and the professor, well, I knew what to expect. He was a bore in person, he was a bore remotely. Nevertheless, it had two great advantages that I took I benefit from completely. First of all, I could take it from the comfort of my own home computer, and secondly, I could do it on my own time. So mornings, late nights, weekends, here we go. And I aced the class and never looked back. That really shaped how I approached e-learning in personal and professional life. So our story, yes. Moving on let's fast forward it to 2008. At that point, I was already a certified interpreter, juggling my interpreting career, a growing company, and my family. But my main challenge was the lack of qualified interpreters. We were offering training classes in person, but the reach was very limited. Obviously, with in-person, you have to consider time, travel, schedule, everything is synchronous, so that there are many factors besides that. So, I was actually attending a conference in Boston in the fall of 2008, and as I was driving back, and I had a 13-hour drive from Boston to Detroit, and I was enjoying the views, the rolling hills and changing fall colors, very beautiful. If you've ever been, you should go. If not, I was contemplating the challenge of qualified interpreters and training. And I came up with the idea of starting online training courses that would be language specific and of course asynchronous. And I had 13 hours to think about it, to connect with a few potential co-authors, and plan how to approach it. This is how Interpreter Education Online the idea was conceived, and eventually in 2009 we launched our courses, initially for court interpreters, and eventually we added courses for healthcare interpreters, for mental health, interpreters working in mental health, educational interpreters, translators, and much more. And in a sense, we have also rebranded because of that. And now we're called Linguist Education Online. So that's our story. Now, back in 2009, we had a lot of challenges implementing in e-learning concepts and training in the field that was not accustomed to it at all. Keep in mind that even though the pioneer of e-learning, Blackboard, launched in 1997, in 2009 we still didn't have Coursera, which was started in 2012, or Udemy that started in 2010. So students that were coming to us were not accustomed to e-learning. And that was a challenge on its own. We could talk about that for an hour easily. A lot of them were not tech savvy. I remember that we had to put together materials just as a manual for students starting any course. to make sure that they know how to use technology, how to record themselves, even how to work with PDFs. Also, e-learning solutions were limited and therefore limiting. However, we still were able to meet our goal, and our goal was to create language-specific, asynchronous training solutions that would meet interpreters at the point in their career where they were. Newbies, getting ready to be certified, certified and looking for CEUs, or subject matter expertise. So in that sense, I'm proud to say that we kind of paved the way in interpreter e-learning and substantially grown in the 15 years that we've been doing this, adding many vertical solutions and topics. And supporting TNI industry in a way. So from courses and training solutions to testing and now doing biennial conference, Leo has been accredited along the way and even won some awards. So at some point later on, moving on to Bromberg, the other company that both Jessica and I are affiliated with, we decided to launch an e-learning department at Bromberg. And you would think that with the lessons that we had from Leo, Linguist Education Online, it would be a smooth sailing. It was not. It was quite the opposite. Determining our focus, our direction, identifying our ideal client persona took much longer and was much more complex. It was also impacted by external factors. So initially, we started with the focus on developing courses on cultural competency and cultural awareness. We had experience teaching those topics in person, and we decided to transition to online with e-learning. We had experience in both cultural awareness and cultural competency types of topics. So with e-learning, we were thinking, well, do we go wide and cover what it is, or do we go in depth and focus on a specific region, country, or language? And eventually we settled with doing the latter and created a great deal of in-depth materials that could be beneficial for anyone looking to go on a work trip, move for work, to go to school, or just to live. And we were really close. In a sense, we were already ready with the app development. We had the scope of work. All of that was in March of 2020. And we all know what happened then. The world stood still for a period of time, and then started adjusting. E-learning became the only way people could learn, and we all had to learn how to be good at that. But at the same time, our e-learning content, our direction were no longer relevant. No one was traveling at the time. So we had to pivot our e-learning focus to what emerged as a major growth area, not just for us, but globally. And that was supporting e-learning needs of a global workforce. Of course, that was not new. Companies have been working globally for many, many years. In fact, I looked at the statistics, and between 1993 and 2003, over 1 billion people entered the global workforce, meaning working remotely, which is amazing. However, this number is still continuing to grow, and therefore it means a lot of opportunities as well as challenges, of course. So today, we will focus our presentation on lessons learned along the way, and with that, I will turn it over to Jessica to talk about how to get started with building a strong foundation.
Thank you, Ginny. Thank you for being here. And I do want to preface this with saying that Ginny told the story. I'm going to tell you, if you want to do the same thing, how to do it. And also, our keynote speaker spoke a lot about teaching and e-learning today, so I got a lot of inspiration to add to this presentation, so I'm going to freestyle a little bit. And this is based on my personal experience. I did my undergrad in a e-learning format, and I did my grad in a blended format because it was during the pandemic. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of how that experience was for me. So starting with building a strong foundation, we are going to touch base on a few things about what you need if you want to build or purchase an e-learning solution for your company. And the reason for that is because I think our keynote speaker really highlighted today that we are in our industry, if we're going to just speak about the TNI industry, is that we are going to expect a huge shift in the next decade or so for what the workforce in the industry, in every industry, specifically in ours, is going to look like. And I don't think we're going to be able to catch up with that change, be ready for it if we don't adopt e-learning solution. I don't think we're going to be able to handle that with an in-person format. So let's start with the learning management system, which is what you need. This is your foundation for what you need to be able to deliver e-learning content, whether you're purchasing or you're building. So a learning management system, also known as an LMS, will make all the difference on your e-learning journey. So choosing the right LMS for your organization will depend on your organization's needs and budget. Budget is a huge deciding factor here. So I'll give you some examples of an affordable LMS, and we could throw a name out there that's Moodle. Not a lot of people, some people might say, yes, we love Moodle. Some people might say, we don't like Moodle. It depends what you're using it for, what your needs are. It allows you to build content and present it in a customizable way, as well as having more control over your design elements. So Moodle tends to be on the more affordable side of the spectrum. That's why I mention it here, because if you're probably starting new with e-learning at your organization, you might want to start with a more affordable solution and then go to something else, depending on what those needs are going to look like. On the other hand, you have companies that are specialized in e-learning. That's all they do, like Coursera and Udemy. And those companies aren't working with a third-party LMS. They're building their own. So Coursera has their own learning management system, which you cannot purchase and you cannot use for your own because it's their proprietary software. And this route, so if you want to purchase a e-learning solution, you don't really have to concern yourself which LMS the company is using. But if you do want to build your own solution, you might want to consider the costs associated with building an LMS or purchasing an LMS to delivering your content. You can also, there is a third route. If you don't want to do everything in the LMS, you can use a content builder. Like there's companies like Articulate and iSpring where you can build your content there because they offer more flexibility around content building and creation. And then you can deliver it through an LMS system that could be Moodle or something else. The next point we will talk about is content development. Content development is obviously the core of e-learning. So if you don't have content, you don't really have anything to say and you don't have anything to offer. And it is also your main differentiator. So choosing a company that delivers diverse and varied content is instrumental to implementing an effective e-learning solution. If you are building an e-learning solution, curating content that is engaging and interesting is the key, obviously. And it is part of building a wholesome solution. So you do need good content writers. You need to have a unique voice in what you're trying to deliver, like Clio does, like Bromberg does. We try to differentiate our solutions from what's out there. There's always an aspect to an e-learning course that nobody else is offering. Ginny's going to talk a little bit about a cybersecurity course. There's a lot of cybersecurity courses out there, but ours is a little bit different. You're not going to find anything like it. So even if you have the right LMS picked, without the right content, the learning process will not be as beneficial as it would be otherwise. Instructional design. So it's like, it sounds confusing. What is instructional design? Some people might be hearing this for the first time. Instructional design is a core part of e-learning, but is not as complex as long as you're approaching this in a logical way. So what is instructional design exactly? So instructional design is a way of ensuring that content is organized and presented in a logical manner, aiming to enhance the learning experience and making it easier for the learner to comprehend and retain information. So I'm going to give you an example here, and it's a linguistic example. So for instance, Do you think delivering content, e-learning content to a Spanish speaker is going to be the same as delivering content to an Arabic speaker? The answer to this is absolutely not. So maybe the content itself will be the same, but the way you deliver the content is going to be different. And there's a very simple reason for that is because the Arabic is a right-to-left language, and software get really confused with right-to-left languages. So while you have an LMS that's delivering Spanish, you don't have to really, worry about that. You come and bring that content, you localized it, you did everything. You put it on the LMS, it's gibberish, or it starts from the left to the right, and then the Arabic reader has to start reading from the left to the right to be able to understand, which is not good, and it doesn't deliver a good experience. So you have to consider making sure that whatever tools, whatever technology you're using, if your target audience is Arabic speakers, which it should be, because there's a lot of Arabic speakers in the world, and if you want, to tap into that market, you should speak to them in their language. You want an LMS that supports that. You want content creators that understand how to create content simply from right to left, and that's one very basic start to the challenges you may have with localizing content on an LMS. So that is a very basic example of an instructional design consideration for diverse learners. So this is a very important aspect of e-learning. If you are buying an e-learning solution, you may have less control over this. When you are building a solution, you may choose which instructional design features to implement. Maybe you don't care about Arabic speakers, you don't deliver content to Arabic speakers, you don't have to worry about that. So you don't have to go and look for an LMS or a CMS or a content builder that accommodates right to left languages. So maybe that's not your concern. If it is, you would need to consider that. And in this sense, I would be amiss not to mention something about accessibility. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about web accessibility, what it means. Some people may have more advanced knowledge and some people may have very basic knowledge. We're not going to get too much into accessibility in this presentation because it's a very big topic, but e-learning itself is really an opportunity to create more inclusive and diverse learning solutions, and making solutions accessible for people from also diverse learning abilities and physical abilities or disabilities is very important here. So it is our responsibility to make sure that our e-learning solutions are accessible by anyone, regardless of their cognitive and physical abilities. We'll talk a little more about what that means, from alt text to captioning videos to some of the very basic things. But obviously, if you have more questions about web accessibility in general or e-learning and web accessibility, just find us after the presentation. We can talk more about that. The next thing we will cover is subject matter experts, SMEs. There are very important stuff to consider here because SMEs play an integral role in any solution, but e-learning specifically, because they can look at content accuracy and quality, contextualization, customization, and feedback and improvement. So SMEs also ensure content is culturally and linguistically appropriate. And we, at Bromberg, we specialize in cultural and linguistic appropriateness. So we make sure that our content is always appropriate for different cultures, and we localize it in multiple languages. So that's why you would need subject matter experts. And I would like to stress this point as it could make or break your content delivery and effectiveness. When you delve into the realm of e-learning solutions, it is your responsibility to engage SMEs every step of the way to ensure all content is accurate and appropriate. Though there is a challenge, and this is what we are talking about today, opportunities and challenges, is that finding subject matter experts is not a simple task, especially for e-learning, because right now, e-learning is mainly taking non-digital content and making it digital, and a lot of subject matter experts are not used to e-learning. They're not used to digitization of content, so they know in person, face-to-face, and that's not necessarily the same skills that you take and you apply to e-learning. Therefore, right now, as an industry, we are at a place where we should be working on equipping our subject matter experts to be able to develop e-learning solution and also to pivot from that in-person, face-to-face format that they're used to take that knowledge and apply it to virtual, remote learning from a distance format. The next point would be, and the last point here, learner support services. So learner support services might be an afterthought when you're thinking of an e-learning solution or when you're building one or when you're purchasing one, but they are involved every step of the way, essentially. You involve learner support services in curating, creating, and delivering e-learning content. They play a part in accessibility, personalization, guidance and direction, and technical support. And I included this at the end because it may be looked at as an aftercare solution. Like it's more related to customer success, client retention, user experience. But it is actually a foundational thing. You have to really consider learner support services from the foundation when you're building the solution, or if you're purchasing one, looking at that company, what support does it offer to learners? What is it going to offer to your users that's going to be unique? 24/7 support, chat, live chat, whatever it is that is going to make your user feel like they have access to a support person whenever they need one. If you fail to build a strong support system, even if your LMS choice is right, and your content is amazing, and you have the smartest and the best instructional design, and you have SMEs and all of that, your solution will be lacking and will impact effective learning, and it is likely to negatively impact the overall learning experience for your users. The next thing we are moving on is to, and I will leave this here, is talking about building or buying. And what are we really discussing here? The reason I wanted to get to this point and do the introduction related to the foundations of e-learning is to maybe help you answer the question of build or buy. I hope that everyone in this room is considering you already have an e-learning solution. If you don't, you're seriously considering figuring that out for your teams and for your employees or for other companies you work with. And I'm hoping that we can go through what you need to know right now if you are going to build or buy a solution. So the first thing we'll start with is, is needs assessment. Needs assessment. So it starts like any solution you're trying to build or buy, you assess the needs. So why do you need e-learning? Why is e-learning important to me and my organization? And we've been talking about that a lot. Our keynote speaker talked about that this morning. The answer to this question will vary greatly from one organization to another. But one thing for sure is we all have needs that are currently present in our companies and organization. And I'll tell you a few examples of what we found over the years that are within our organization or other organizations we've helped. So you may find that you need e-learning solution to close gaps related to time constraints that are associated with traveling to a physical location to learn or expand on a certain skill. So a geographical barrier is there, and through e-learning, that's completely eliminated. You may be able to send your people to trainings that are overseas or through organizations they would never have access to if it weren't for e-learning. So e-learning eliminates those barriers and gives quality education on a global scale. You may find there are some skill gaps in your workforce, which I'm sure you will find that at this point. They can be resolved through e-learning by offering targeted training programs and upskilling opportunities. And this is a very important point here. Upskilling is the biggest opportunity and challenge we have in our industry today, in every industry out there. Additionally, e-learning allows organizations to invest in their teams by offering lifelong learning for teams that are rapidly growing and evolving. So these are only a few examples that you may come across. And as Ginny mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, LEO was created out of a pressing need. LEO, Linguist Education Online, was created out of a pressing need to provide training and learning programs for linguists. When the company was founded in 2009, there was no other programs offering what the company offers. And I want to say today, even, there's not a lot of programs that offer what Linguist Education Online offers. And how do I know some of these needs that you may come across? Because Bromberg as an organization with a growing and evolving global team had to assess and answer these questions before you have to in order to invest in the growth of our teams. The next thing is the cost assessment, and obviously cost is a big thing for all of us, and it's always a factor in everything we consider. So cost assessment takes center stage when it comes to choosing and building an e-learning solution. But there is a bottom line. Building a solution is going to require a larger initial investment. And depending on what you are building, you may, and when I say you may, I mean maybe 99% of the time, you will need to continuously invest in that solution for future feature development. You're going to have technical teams always working on that solution and maintaining it. You will need to have dedicated technical and non-technical team or teams working solely on this solution. While buying, on the other hand, would require a much smaller initial investment. And most importantly, it offers some level of flexibility in choosing. Buying allows you to adjust, add, and remove offerings as needed. You may scale up or down very easily. And if you have finite needs, you may stop or pause the service as needed. Today, it is quite possible to buy a customized e-learning solution package from a company that is designed and created specifically for you. So you don't have to give up that customization luxury anymore to build your own solution. So I don't want to buy because the company has a set of e-learning solutions, and they may fit some of my needs, but not all of them. So I want to build a solution. That is not really a factor anymore, because with AI and with the flexibility in content development and the advancement in technology, e-learning companies can come and say, what are your needs? And then I'm going to build a course for you and your team, and specifically for you. The next thing would be the competitive edge. And this is something you would need to really consider if you're building a solution. Because if you're building a solution, you have to have a competitive advantage. So I will talk about our Leo example here. Leo simply has a competitive advantage and a competitive edge. It offers something that very few others can. It continues to do so. And if you want to build an e-learning solution, but you don't know what your competitive advantage is, what your competitive edge, how are you going to stand out? You can start looking for that, and you may be looking and looking and looking. But I will say this, is if you don't find it, maybe you don't force it, maybe you don't have that, and maybe you go to a company that is already building a solution that you want and buy from that company. The last point we will talk, not the last point, the next point we will talk about here is customization and scalability. And I think those are two big words right now that you'll keep hearing: customization, personalization, and scalability. So customization and scalability have become very prevalent post-COVID because the need for e-learning is just more, and it will continue to grow. For every in-person program or conference, you will find there is a virtual equivalent, or there is a mix of in-person and virtual. The call for customization is mainly due to the fact that we are now shifting to make solutions more learner-centric. Fortunately, e-learning offers the opportunity to customize to different learning styles and build learning solutions to fit learners from all different backgrounds. We've known for a long time that learners have different learning styles, but when you are in a classroom, you can't really deliver for every learner's personalized style. You have to deliver one format and hope that they do their best. And our keynote speaker mentioned that when you do one-to-one tuition, you have a 98% success rate, 2 standard deviation away from the mean, which is fascinating, probably. But you can't do that in a classroom format. You have to go and do it in e-learning. E-learning can do that. And we are going to talk about the different delivery methods later in this presentation about how you can do that. Scalability. Scalability, on the other hand, is perhaps one of the most important technical aspects of building or buying an e-learning solution. In our globalized world, you must be prepared to support global user growth. You must have a solution that can scale often, and it can do that seamlessly. So you're not going to have 3 days downtime to scale up your solution, to upgrade your servers. Scalability looks at this from different aspects, including but not limited to user growth, course offerings, learning styles and presentations, costs associated with scaling, and technological requirements, which will bring us to the last point here, which is about technical expertise. And I chose this to be the last point I mention here because I wanted to get to this point after everything we already went over to drive the idea that cheap, fast, and good does not exist. And I think we all know that by now. If you are seriously looking into building an e-learning solution, you should know that this will require a serious technical and time investment and expertise. You have to have the right people on your team, from UI to UX designers, to the developers, to the data analysts, to the user roles, to the quality assurance engineers, to the product managers and the product owners. And there's a really big list for the teams you need to have to build your e-learning solution. So be ready to learn and invest if you would like to build your own solution or buy from a company that's already doing this. So before we move on to what Ginny would like to discuss, I want to launch a quick poll because I think I gave you a lot of information right now, and I just want to know where you stand. So I just want to do a check-in with you, essentially. Okay, so this is our first question. There'll be 3 questions in this poll. I'll give it another minute before I move to the next question. Okay, I'm moving to the next question. I don't see anyone wanting to build their e-learning solution. That's not what the presentation's aim is. Well, some people want to. That's good. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. And this is essentially just listing the things that we just went over and what you think is going to be the biggest challenge to overcome if you are looking at building or buying an e-learning solution, because they're applicable to both. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop this right now, and then we're going to get back to our presentation. Thank you very much for your participation. The presentation is in Spanish, the functionality of PowerPoint, and I don't understand it. Okay, here we go.
All right. Yeah, thank you for participation. That was quite interesting. So let's continue. It can be, thank you, Jessica. It can be argued that one of the greatest benefits of e-learning is the expanded access to education that it offers. With English being considered the unofficial lingua franca of the internet, a great portion of e-learning has been and is still in English. However, in the recent years, there has been a clear push to localize e-learning content, and many of you know about it firsthand, as you are the ones localizing it. Considering that 71% of internet users access internet in English, but their first language is not English, it is more than necessary. And as studies have shown, having content be localized can boost productivity by up to 50%. With localization and content creation, it is important to consider cultural relevancy because they all come hand in hand. Cultural relevancy can be seen as a challenging barrier for content creators because it has many nooks and crannies, and we don't want to miss or forget anything. Ensuring that e-learning content is culturally relevant has to come from the very beginning, from picking the topics and then curating your content. In many ways, it can be similar to content localization for other industries. For example, the following checklist can be a very good example of what to implement here. Units of measurement, dates and currency, names, places, local expressions, references, slang, images, illustrations, colors, fonts, even music and accents, and of course the list can be expanded tenfold. When we do the breakdown, cultural relevancy can really be a fun work for any e-learning content. And I would like to give one example that comes from our cybersecurity course. Let's consider how phishing and vishing attacks can take place in different parts of the world. So for instance, in the US, you get calls from IRS, Internal Revenue Service, for non-existent owed taxes, or from utility companies about your services being terminated immediately if you don't pay a non-existent bill, or from your grandson who is jailed and needs to be bailed out. Versus, let's say, Argentina, where there are attacks against the elderly that take place via WhatsApp and focus on opportunities for currency exchange. Those attacks can be so elaborate that the attackers literally come to the elderly person's home, take them to the currency exchange place, and scam them there. As a matter of fact, I recently had a conversation with someone whose elderly relative was taken for a large sum of money exactly that way. Now let's look at Lebanon. In Lebanon, the attacks also are carried out via WhatsApp and not a regular phone. But they don't focus on currency exchange as much as they focus on non-existing winnings. You won a prize, hooray, pay $10 or whatever it may be. So in general, what I would like to stress here is that understanding cultural relevancy and incorporating it in your content has helped us to make the content both much more culturally relevant, but also very practical and relatable. So let's consider another aspect at this point, digitization. When we think of e-learning, it is automatic to think of digitizing content. We all know benefits of that, but there are still many challenges that come along. I would like to highlight a few in this presentation. Content quality, making sure that content continues having high quality and learning objective for students is crucial when digitizing your e-learning content. Now, I do want to stress here that I'm talking about content being digitized, not created initially in a digital format, specifically. Accessibility, and Jessica mentioned accessibility already, so I'm not gonna spend any time on it. Just to say that web accessibility must be included in any e-learning project during your planning phase, because it's much more difficult to do it as an afterthought. Technology, just like with anything else that depends on technological infrastructure, technology will always have its pros and cons. E-learning platforms require a really robust technological infrastructure to deliver content smoothly to its users. Assessment and feedback. Perhaps one of the biggest challenges in e-learning is planning the assessment portion and collecting and providing meaningful feedback. Designing quizzes and assignments to be effective and engaging is not an easy process in education in general, and with the added learning from a distance component of e-learning, it becomes much more challenging. And we can discuss it a little bit more later in the presentation. One more factor to consider is plagiarism and the consequences on the learning environment. It is important to have a plan for how to counter it in your e-learning processes. So now I'm gonna go back to Jessica for a section on innovative learning solutions.
So we've been talking about the diversity of learners and the fact that it would be very difficult to deliver personalized learning experiences in an in-person format. So we're gonna go over a little bit what those learning solutions look like virtually through e-learning. I have to go quick because we are running out of time. So we are gonna cover microlearning, gamification, blended learning, and storytelling today. So microlearning, which is something you've all been hearing lately. What is microlearning and what does it do? It's creating short and focused learning material that include quizzes and interactive modules. And in today's fast-paced world, people really gravitate toward e-learning because it is a good approach to offer flexible solutions on the go. Learners will spend on average 10 to 15 minutes on a given modules. And one of the greatest aspects of microlearning is that it is self-paced. So modules are coming out on a rolling basis based on each student's progress. They don't have to start the course with everyone else, and they don't have to end with everyone else. They start at their own time, and then their progress is based on their own learning. It's not in a class format with 200 other students. Microlearning is easily integrated with different workflows, so learners can access specific material exactly when they need it. We can essentially turn any content piece or course into a microlearning modules, breaking the learning modules into small, manageable pieces, and delivering it on a rolling basis, as I said. Now, most topics can be good candidates for microlearning solutions, but obviously, there are some things we're not going to turn a quantum computing course into a micro-learning lesson. So there are some things, obviously, considering your content is very important when you're doing this. The next one is gamification, and it's in the name, gamifying content. So letting users go through a challenge and earning points and earning rewards. And gamification is very popular nowadays. You will find it on a lot of courses and on a lot of learning solutions because it is a good way to engage users, and users find it easier to get through a course when there's a reward at the end. So gamification is also allowing us to, as the person delivering the e-learning solution, we can collect a lot of feedback through gamification about user preferences. It can help us better with user retention and also with analyzing the habits of our users. Blended learning, which is what I described in the beginning. I did my MBA in a blended learning format where we did some in-person and some remote, and a lot of it was remote because of the pandemic. Blended learning is being very much adopted by higher education. A lot of universities now are pairing with Coursera and Udemy to deliver graduate degrees and certificates and undergraduate degrees through a blended learning format where there is an in-person component at the university and the student is taking their modules on Coursera for the remote portion as well. It's becoming a very popular format as well. Storytelling, which is the last one I will talk about today, it's perhaps the most challenging but also the most rewarding form of e-learning because storytelling allows us to create culturally relevant content, as Ginny mentioned, and it allows us to really customize that learning experience for the user. It allows the user to really understand the backstory, delve into the plots and the characters, and it allows them to really activate their critical thinking and their creative problem solving. However, in order for that to be successful, it has to be culturally relevant. You have to know your users and understand their backgrounds to be able to deliver stories and learning experiences that are relevant to them, that they can understand in order to solve the problem, in order to reach that learning goal that they have. Storytelling is one of the most effective learning methods. It's one of my favorite, but it's also one of the most challenging to deliver. And it can be a really good way of delivering marketing content because it can really make that user think about who they're trying to reach in that market and that marketing strategy that they're building. Now we will talk about the learner-centered approach, which really, as you have already picked up on, our entire presentation is about the learner-centered approach. It is a learner-centered presentation. But what we are trying to do here is just explain a little bit about how to collect feedback, because Ginny mentioned is collecting feedback is probably one of the most challenging things to do in a remote learning environment. And we have tried a few things, and this is what works for us, and maybe it will work for you too. So we are gonna tell you what that is. There are 4 things that we do right now. Surveys, we also do interviews, and we do interactive polls and quizzes. Surveys, you all know what surveys are. You can essentially send a survey anytime you want in a learning experience, before a quiz, after a module, after a webinar, after a conference. The key is in the timing. If you want people to participate in your survey, make sure you understand the timing and you send it to them at a pretty good time. Then we have interviews. Interviews are a little more involved. We try to plan those out and as resources and time allow as well. And surveys allow us to just kind of get the real experience, like it's more of a testimony of what that course is doing, how that is impacting the person's progress and learning. And then we have interactive polls and quizzes, which is what we're doing here. As you can see, we are launching polls to gauge what you're learning from this presentation. The best thing about polls and quizzes is you can put them throughout your content, and they can be giving you a feedback in real time. So they take a module, you put a poll there, you put a quiz there, they take it, you get the feedback of what is the interest, what they like, what they didn't like. Those are the main things that I will go over today. There are other collection methods, but we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to turn it over to Ginny.
Thanks, Jess. So just as a wrap up, so we have 2 minutes for questions. For some of you who know us and might be familiar with our work, you would know that we always look at the future to see what is going on with our industry and beyond. What the future holds is literally the title of one of our panels at the LEO's biennial conferences, where we discuss the future of the industry. So it's only appropriate to end our presentation with discussing the vision for the future and the emerging trends that might be coming. You may have noticed that we really haven't covered AI in depth, and we didn't want to do it because there's so much talk about AI at the conference already. But fear not, AI is and will be an important part of e-learning. When it comes to artificial intelligence and e-learning, we're seeing that AI is being integrated in every aspect possible, as long as it's done ethically and appropriately. From customization and learning path, content creation and curation, gamification, of course, chatbots, natural language processing, and so on. According to Jessica, soon enough we may see e-learning solutions that present content in real time to learners based on those learners' input and predictive modeling. Please don't quote me on that. That's just an example, but that might be happening. With AI, we must expect and already see some solutions that include virtual and augmented reality, such as the real virtual classroom. These technologies are creating more immersive environments for our users, and that is something that we will be seeing moving forward. However, I also would like to stress that I believe in having human in the loop or human in the core, at the core in e-learning, just like most of other professions. And not only we plan to maintain our wonderful current e-learning development team, but hopefully grow it as well. Outside of technology, we expect to focus on skill building, just like the keynote mentioned earlier today. And we expect that to continue. With the job market evolving quickly, we have jobs in high demand today, and we must equip people today to be able to take those jobs and be employable tomorrow. This is where e-learning comes as a perfect solution for skill-based learning. That being said, the challenges we have today will remain the challenges of tomorrow. Internet access, that is a huge challenge, and it is something that we need to consider as a basic human right as of today. Another challenge is the speed with which we can localize content. with the sheer volume of content out there, it is very challenging to do that. That's where we expect to employ a lot more AI and, well, machine translation and other AI solutions. In summary, e-learning has proven to be an integral part of today's learner's journey. I can't envision the world where e-learning is not being utilized. And for that, for that to improve and continue, we must focus on processes, on accessibility, and access, and of course, delivery. I hope we're leaving you today with some ideas for your own e-learning path. And I know we're at time. There is a lot more that we could and would like to discuss. So let's open for Q&A, and if
1
anybody
minute.
wants to stay afterwards, we're happy to discuss as well. So thank you so much, and please, any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we do one question and then they can
Okay.
do separately.
But we will be also here after
Yeah.
the conference,
Yeah.
so